Hey everybody, thanks for joining me again, and thank you for taking another week to work on your marriage. I realize it's so important and so vital for us to do that, so thank you for doing that. This week we have a topic that could be a little controversial, at least the title anyway, is these are lies that we bought into and we must get rid of in order to ever find success in life. So here comes some lies, but first, some social distancing observations, because I know that this was missing for some of you last week when I did an interview. And so I know some of you are probably, when you see, oh, he's just going to talk to a couple, there's going to be no social distancing observations, are very frustrated. Maybe not. But anyway, okay. So I want to talk a little bit about masks that we wear out in public now. And so there's a couple dilemmas that I'm facing with the mask. And so if I'm required to wear the mask out, and I do wear the mask out, do I make a statement with the mask? Do I just wear a plain Jane mask, or do I wear something that has like Star Wars on it, or my favorite football team, or something like that? And it's kind of like a little bit, the mask is kind of like a tattoo saying, am I all in on this? Do I want the world to know this is my thing? And so it's a little difficult to decide what to get on the custom mask. And so that's just a little dilemma I'm having a little bit. And a side note, for those of you that may be able to help me with this, is when you wear glasses and then you wear the mask, I haven't quite figured out the good balance so the glasses don't fog up and so you don't look like a weird person with fogged up glasses out there. But in wearing the mask out, I have felt a little bit maybe like a villain, or what a superhero would feel like, that's wearing the mask. You feel a little invincible. And so I'm kind of liking that feeling a little bit. I kind of feel like I'm a superhero. Okay, sorry. But anyway, and then the other thing is, my last observation about the mask is it either fits very tight or it's very loose where it's kind of hanging all over. And so I don't know if you've seen some of these press conferences with people with masks on and they're too tight and their ears are kind of all turned into cauliflower ears. And so you'd think that someone would say, hey, if that's really that uncomfortable, you might need a better fitting mask. Just a few thoughts. But isn't it funny how in just a few short weeks, now all of a sudden I'm sitting here pontificating about mask wearing and I'm the mask expert. It's probably not reality. But anyway. All right, so this past week, I saw a little interview where they did a Zoom call where they had a bunch of Back to the Future cast members from the original movie. And so I thought, let's go back to the future just a little bit with our talk today. And so let's go back to your wedding day. Hopefully it was a fun day for you and your family and all those involved. But I wonder what was going through your mind. We may not even be aware enough to know what was going through our mind. At least I know I wasn't at that day. But from my perspective, as a person that's been married for 25 years now and works with couples every day, I do believe this for sure, that on that wedding day, we thought we knew everything about marriage and thought we understood the truth about marriage. But I believe wholeheartedly there were some lies that we believed at that time about marriage that have kind of set us in a bad direction. Some lies that we all had in our brains. And those lies we've talked about before. They come from TV, for me at least they did, from movies, from books, from seeing other relationships, our parents. And so there's a place where all those things come from. But we all bought into some lies. And my contention is that we all had misconceptions that day about marriage and how it should work. And those things in our brain have led us to kind of either have some frustrations or some misconceptions, at least for today. The problem is that those misconceptions typically become our reality. We think this is the way it should be. And if our marriage doesn't live up to those lies, then we get frustrated or very, at least disappointed with the way things are going. And the thing that I really believe is that our marriages typically aren't the problem. Okay, this is a weird statement. Our marriages typically aren't the problem. It's what we believe about what marriage should be giving us. That is the problem. So we have to kind of look at some of those things that are going through our brain and realize, are those good things, are those lies, or are those truths? And so I guess the question for me is, what lies do I still believe? What lies have I believed about marriage? What lies are you believing about your marriage? And how can we kind of begin to look at those things a little bit? I believe part of my purpose in life, at least, and I wrote down a lot of R words here, so is to reframe, is to reshape, is to renew, is to rehabilitate, refuse some lies, and reclaim the truth about what marriage is so that we can pursue that truth instead of those lies. All right, one of my favorite passages is Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. And it says, therefore, is the very first word of Romans chapter 12, verse 1. And a dumb little thing I've said for years is whenever there's a therefore in Scripture, you should always ask, what is it there for? And so it's pointing back to this doxology that's right above it, the praise thing that Paul is writing. And in that, he's saying that God is the source of all things. God is the source of all knowledge. God is the source of all guidance. He's creator, and we can trust in him. So God is the source of all truth. And so therefore, he says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of all this, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. And the idea here is that one of the best things that we can do in worship, the best thing we can do in worship, is offer our entire selves to God, not just in moments of music or moments of heightened feeling of God, but in all things we're supposed to honor God by giving ourselves to him. And so he tells us how to do that in verse 2. He says, so do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, how they think, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind and trying to figure out what God's ways are. God's ways are. That's good in English. God's ways are. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will, his plan, his purposes for our lives. And so God is that source. We've got to go to him. We need our minds transformed. One of my favorite authors, who people make fun of me that I quote all the time, is Gary Thomas. And he has this controversial statement, at least it was when I first heard it. And he says, marriage is designed to make us holy more than it's designed to make us happy. Let me repeat that controversial statement one more time. Marriage is designed primarily to make us holy in God's view of things, as opposed to making us happy. So why is that controversial? And so one of the major lies that life, if lived correctly, is that we're supposed to have this endless source of joy, that anything we do, anything we participate, if it doesn't make us happy, then it's really not God's will, it's not God's purpose, it's not something we should be involved in. If we're not finding joy where we're at, then we must change the circumstances or the things around us in terms of like relationships, in terms of jobs, in terms of where we live. So if we're not finding complete joy, the answer can't be anything but the circumstances around us, and so we change. And also, as kind of ingrained in us, maybe as citizens of the United States of America, is the pursuit of happiness is the number one goal in life. And so if we're not happy, then we need to find another way to be happy. So when some people read this statement or hear this statement by Gary Thomas that marriage is designed to make us holy more than make us happy, they're kind of assuming that as Christians we're saying that marriage isn't something that's going to happen in your marriage, and so just forget about that. So just pursue holiness. I don't think that's it at all. I think what Gary Thomas is saying, and I think it's very biblical, is that oftentimes we pursue the wrong things. We pursue the lies. And so if we pursue our self-fulfillment, our selfishness, everything's making me happy, that tends to lead to us not being happy because we find frustration, we find lack of fulfillment, and so we just can't, it's an elusive goal. And so it's almost like a mirage that if we pursue our self-interest, we're going to find joy. But I think the Bible's telling us that that is a way just leads to nothing. But if we pursue God's ways of doing things and kind of understand how God thinks about things, if we renew our minds and find out what God's good, pleasing, and perfect will is, if we pursue that, at the end of that is the fountain of youth. At the end of that is the buried treasure. At the end of that is the thing that makes us happy. And so it's like happiness is still out there. But if we're pursuing just our selfish pleasure and joy, we're going to find unfulfillment. But if we can somehow seek God's ways, then all of a sudden, happiness is a goal that we can achieve. Matthew 6:33 puts it this way. He says, if you seek first God's kingdom and his righteousness, then all these things will be given to you. So if we seek God, if we seek to be like God, we can find happiness. But the problem is with all these lies and misconceptions about marriage is we're often pursuing the wrong things that lead us to no person's land. So we've got to renew our thinking. And so, in other words, according to Scripture, God's ways truly lead to joy, contentment, and happiness, and hope, and peace, and joy. And the lies that this ungodly way of thinking, they lead to unfulfillment and disillusionment. So, in marriage, my question then is, what are some of the lies that we've bought into? And I'm just going to share a few with you here, and I'll post some other lies along the way. But here's some lies that I think that we bought into. I know that I bought into about marriage. And if we buy into these lies, they lead to that unfulfillment. But the truth leads us to true joy. All right, lie number one. Love is a great emotional high all the time, that if love is something we should always feel, it should just be this sense of joy and happiness and contentment in our relationship. And if that is gone, then something's wrong. If we're not feeling it, if it kind of loses its luster for a little bit, then we've got to change our circumstances. Because if it was truly love, we would feel this emotional high or this euphoria all the time. But as I read Scripture and as I've understood things by my own marriage and talking with many others, that love is not described in Scripture as a feeling. Love is described as action. Tough times, it seems like in life, for relationships, for anything, are inevitable. And the current virus situation that we're living through economically and physically is a tough time. But I've discovered, and research has backed this up, that if couples kind of last through those difficult times, that marital satisfaction tends to go up as they kind of learn these lessons. As they learn that this marriage doesn't always bring me joy and fulfillment, that there are tough times, that sometimes I don't feel it, but I just continue to do the right thing, that it eventually will lead to that. So tough times are inevitable. The second lie that I believe that we often buy into is that my marriage problems are unique. I remember when I was going through ReEngage, I had an aha moment when some of the gals around the circle were talking about things that they kind of hurt about or they kind of struggled with. And for a long time, I believed my wife was the only one that had that problem. And it was this aha moment when I realized that, okay, this is kind of a universal struggle, that it's not just me, it's not just her that struggles with this. And so one of the things that as I meet with couples is that oftentimes they start to tell their story and they feel some shame or some embarrassment about their story. But it's interesting from this perspective, after hearing hundreds of stories, that often I kind of can relate to where their story's going pretty quickly. And so one of the counseling principles is never rush to judgment, but it's difficult to do that and realizing that, hey, these problems are not unique. These problems are not isolated, that a lot of people have them, and that God could work through every one of those circumstances. And I've seen God work through every one of those circumstances and bring about joy and hope. That's one of the joys about being in communities. We realize that our marriage problems aren't unique. The problems are typical, common, part of every marriage relationship. Another lie is the soulmate mentality. The last one I'll talk about here today is the soulmate mentality. So a lot of times what happens in marriage is we have this idea that there's only one person for us. And if there's any kind of difficulty, we think immediately, I married the wrong person. One of my friends, therapist Scott Gornto, says it like this. He says, a lot of times couples see this set of problems that they have, and they think if I just get out of this set of problems, things will be so much better for me. And so they run to another relationship. And he says what really happens is we're just exchanging one set of problems for another set of problems. That every relationship is going to have some difficulty. Every relationship is going to have some struggle. And so in the Bible, it talks about when we get married, the two shall become one. And so whoever you are married to right now, you are a soulmate with that person. God has joined you together. It's mystical. It's hard for us to understand, but that is the truth. But the problem is we have to realize that even soulmates in the best of relationships have struggles. Even though my wife and I get along beautifully, there's days where we kind of snark at each other. There's days that I don't feel so much like, boy, this person's my soulmate. I love this person. But as we kind of endure those times a little bit, we start to feel that pass and realize that those are just fleeting thoughts and we can work through those things. And I've seen it work through them many, many times. So in conclusion, and I'm going to post some of these other lies on our Facebook page. It's just ReEngage at Hope Fellowship. I'm going to post some of these other lies throughout the week that we've bought into. But I'd like for you to do this as we conclude. I'd like for you to think about your homework for this week. And maybe some of the lies I've talked about here today, or maybe you can come up with some other lies that maybe you've bought into in marriage. Which lies do you tend to really believe about relationships, about your marriage? And then go back and ask yourself, why do I believe them? What is the source of those lies? And then maybe what can I do to remind myself of what is true? Maybe it's studying all the time. Maybe it's posting some things around the room. Maybe it's having your screensaver with some of these truths or whatever it could be. What could I do to remind myself of this? Because what happens is we tend to believe the truth and we say, yeah, that's the truth. We walk away and we start to believe these lies again. We've got to keep bringing ourselves back to the truth. So check our Facebook page this week. I'll be posting some of those other lies. Maybe you can post underneath some of these videos, what are some other lies that you believe, and maybe we can address those and identify what other lies can be affecting you. Negative thoughts about your spouse, about you, seem to be a part of life. Maybe that could be a lie, that we think that we never have negative thoughts. But how can you and I go back to the truth about what God has given, how God has created relationships? Because the problem may not be with our marriages. The problem might be with what we believe about our marriages. We might have to go back to the truth. If we go back to the truth, then maybe our marriages can be even better than we ever thought. All right, thank you guys. Sorry this video was a little long today. I'm blaming all the feedback about the social distancing observations that made it a little long. But thank you guys for listening. And may we all find the truth that God has for us about relationships so we're not continually frustrated by the lies that we believed. Thank you guys.